All righty, good evening. I'm Jonathan Mallahan. I chair the Research and Feasibility Committee, and our role really is to gather and share information about the idea of incorporation. Tonight, I've got a brief presentation for you that is focused on the relationship or comparable cities' tax rates, their levy rates, and the level of public safety services they receive. I want to just be really clear that the purpose of this data and really what we intend by it is not that this is absolutely definitive. This is an estimate. It's based off of some real analysis and research. You can have confidence in that work that's based off of public documents, real adopted city budgets, experts within those cities sharing data, but it is not to replace or shouldn't subordinate any work that the professionals will do when they update the research or the feasibility study. So we don't intend to replace that work. It is intended to be a basis for conversation, and we do intend to just share this information and any questions that come out of the conversation around this with the experts that will be doing the research and feasibility, the feasibility update when that work is undertaken. So the methodology we used to gather this data, there were 9 cities that were interviewed. We asked them various questions about the levels of service and the staffing patterns that they have for public safety in their cities. 6 of those were in Whatcom County, and 3 others were cities of comparable characteristics to Birch Bay. They may have similar size or demographics, or be located on a shoreline. We utilize public records from their department public safety budgets adopted by their legislative bodies, and we used public records from the county assessors' websites to establish levy rates. There are additional limitations on the data. There are some variances in how cities do accounting in their budgets. So that there's a margin of error in here for that. But there's also the fact that police department budgets, public safety budgets, they deliver or contain a different basket of goods depending on the city. So some public safety budgets might include court system, or they might include code enforcement and animal control. So there's also a little bit of variance in our analysis that's based off of that. We did not correct for that variance in the basket of goods in those budgets. So one question we wanted to try to answer is, what could we afford if taxes didn't change? We've heard really clearly from our study that we did, from the survey, the community survey that over 600 people responded to, that impact on tax rates is the #1 concern that people have about incorporation. That's really reasonable. So we thought we should try to address this question. If taxes don't change, what could we afford? Well, the 2008 feasibility study also asked this question and essentially came up with the answer that 9 law enforcement officers were required for 24/7 coverage, that the annual expense of the police department in 2008 would be about $923,000, and there'd be one-time startup costs of $435,000. Now, the feasibility study came to the conclusion that the city of Birch Bay could afford similar levels of service or greater than they were receiving. They anticipated that it would be slightly under that 9 number that might be funded by the city. What we did was we said, okay, of all the cities we interviewed, we noted that they spend 42% of their general fund budget on public safety. So we will, for our analysis, assume that a city of Birch Bay may choose to spend 42% of its budget on public safety. And if we look at, we've done past studies to say what kind of revenue do we think that Birch Bay could generate, and we estimate that it could generate $4.88 million in general fund revenues. And if you've got questions about how we arrived at that number, I'm happy to answer them. But it's about $4.88 million of general fund revenues. That's with no increases to the taxes that anyone in Birch Bay pays. So if we assume that 44.2% of that general fund is spent on public safety, there's about $2.16 million that Birch Bay could afford to spend on public safety. So we looked at how much do cities spend per officer. Now, this number is not to indicate that cities are paying officers $195,000. That is absolutely not the methodology. It is if you reduce the cost of a public safety department, simply divide the total cost of that department, all of its expenses, equipment, overhead, everything, facilities, that's about $195,000 per officer. So that's the methodology we use to arrive at that figure. Based on that, and the assumption that Birch Bay would spend 42% of its general fund revenue on public safety, Birch Bay could afford about 11 police officers, which exceeds the number required to deliver 24/7 services. So we then wanted to say, what are the levels of service in other communities relative to their levy rates? So you can see this chart here. It's pretty simple. Birch Bay is on the left. We've got Blaine, Ferndale, Linden, Everson, Sumas, Stanwood, and Cedar-Woolley. The orange bar is the number of officers that the city has per 1,000 citizens. And then the blue bar is the levy rate that those individuals, those owners pay in that city. So if the levy rate is, that's how much taxes they pay per $1,000 valuation on their home. If you want to figure out what that would be, if your home is worth $1,000, you're paying $6.87 in tax. What we note is that for cities that pay comparable levy rates to Birch Bay, they uniformly have a greater level of service than Birch Bay is currently receiving. Now, I want to be really clear. This is not in any way a criticism of the Sheriff's Department. The Sheriff's Department has a massive responsibility to service an amazing number of square miles. And so it's not intended to disparage in any way the hard work and service that we receive from the Sheriff's Department. I just want to be really clear about that. What we're trying to suggest here is that with the resources a city can generate and their ability to efficiently deliver public safety services in a relatively smaller area, the impact is you get more officers per capita for your smaller area. So that's really what this shows is every city that pays a comparable amount, they receive more service than us. And cities that have elected to increase their taxes further, some of them have spent that on public safety, others have not. Now, what's the right level of service for Birch Bay? That's not really something that we can answer. Ultimately, that needs to be answered by elected officials informed by voter priorities. But I do want to call out that the Washington Association for Sheriffs and Police Chiefs does report that the national average is 2.31 officers per thousand. And the comparable cities that we looked at, the average of all those cities was about 1.98 officers per thousand. I will note that Washington State ranks 51st in the nation for the number of officers per thousand citizens statewide. I believe it's 1.14. It's actually shockingly low compared to every other state in the nation. So based off of our analysis here, we estimate that Birch Bay could afford at least 1.1 officers per thousand citizens with no increase to taxes. So I already addressed this. What happens next? This is not definitive. We'll share this information and any questions that come out tonight with the feasibility committee. And with that, I think we want to hear from our special guest. So I'm going to wrap this up.
All right. Thank you very much. I will let Sheriff Tanksley introduce himself, but we did want to give you a little token of our appreciation. We do appreciate everything you do out here. So here's a little thank you card signed by the group. No, there's no gratuity. I wish if I would have thought ahead. Yeah, of course. And then we do have, I like the Whatcom Museum to go look at the old photos of Birch Bay. It's cool to see what this place was in the 50s, 60s with the carnival and all that. This is a photo of a retired sheriff's deputy. I'm still trying to track down his name. If anybody knows the name of this gentleman, on the motorcycle here in front of the 10-mile-per-hour speed limit sign on Birch Bay Drive. We'd love to know, but the story that I was able to gather from a couple of my neighbors who've been around for a while was that he retired, he loved to ride his motorcycle, and he loved Birch Bay. So he was allowed to come hang out in Birch Bay in the summertime and just post up and look surly. And I don't know if he was able to write any tickets or anything like that, but at the time it was so busy with cars going up and down the drag that people couldn't really go faster than 10 miles an hour. But I wanted to give this to you just to thank you for coming. And then also if it's in your office and you see it, you think of us, you know? Yeah. And I've got one for our Deputy Joel Douglas too. So I'll hand it over. Thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it. Yeah. So that's for the.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. And I do have a PowerPoint. So if I turn around and look, it's just because I'm trying to keep on track. So I'm Donnell Tanksley. I'm the sheriff of Whatcom County. Been the sheriff since about 14 months now. So it's going really well. I think we're almost up. All right. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So first, I think it's important to let folks know about the history of the sheriff's office, and I want to spend about a minute or two and let you know the resources that we have at the sheriff's office. So the sheriff's office was actually started in 1854, so 171 years ago. So we have a long history here in Whatcom County, and I'm really proud of that. If you go to the next slide. So the population of Whatcom County has really grown in the last 10 years. So right now, countywide, we're at about 231 to 235,000 people in Whatcom County, and unincorporated Whatcom County, we're at about 92,000. All right, so if you look at the FTEs, we're allocated 225 full-time employees. Also, our combined budget about $48 million. We have 4 bureaus and law enforcement, corrections, civil, and the Department of Emergency Management. So next, I'm going to really get into the law enforcement aspect. That's going to tie in to what Jonathan was talking about. If you go to the next slide. So this is the primary functions that we provide. So although we have one deputy assigned to Birch Bay that's working 40 hours, you're actually getting a multitude of services, a multitude, not just one deputy. So we provide law enforcement services to all people in Whatcom County. We support and work collectively with all the municipal, state, tribal, federal law enforcement agencies. We enforce court orders, also enforcement at the county courthouse, corrections, the jail, coordinate with our volunteers in terms of search and rescue. And then we do emergency management. Next slide, please. All right, so these are the things that's actually provided to all unincorporated Whatcom County, including Birch Bay. We have our patrol division. We have our detective division. If there's a major crime, our detectives are going to come out here, and they do come out here. We have our patrol investigator. We have our behavioral health deputies, our Marine Patrol unit. I'm sure you've seen them out there before on the bay. We have our K-9 unit, drug task force, search and rescue, traffic, SWAT unit, crime scene investigators, and our drone unit. Those are a lot of resources that we're providing right now, today, to all of unincorporated Whatcom County, including Birch Bay. If you go to the next slide. So sector 1 up there, or zone 1, that does include Birch Bay. Right now, we have 3 different shifts, and those shifts overlap. We have a minimum staffing of, and this is just for patrol, of 4 deputies and 1 sergeant for each shift, and those shifts also overlap. But we also have our traffic unit out there. We also have our detectives out there. So although Joel here is assigned to Birch Bay, the resources are actually vast. If you go to the next slide, please. So I wanted to give you a snapshot of the top 10 calls here in Birch Bay. Top 10, and this is from December of 2022. And this is data that I received from our 911 dispatch center. It's called Whatcom, and it's fresh data. I got it today. Traffic calls, 981. Follow-up investigations, about 500. Then You can see assist citizens, agency assist, watch for. If you wonder what a watch for is, that's when someone calls 911 and said, hey, I think someone is driving down this street in a reckless manner. I don't have any information on them. And then the dispatch will send out a watch for. And then we have, unfortunately, at least 157 calls of people arguing that are in a relationship. So this data, again, is from December of 2022 until today. If you go to the next slide, please. So I broke it down by month and year. So Matt also has access to this whole presentation. So again, this is data, fresh data. So if you look at 2023, we had about 3,000 calls here in Birch Bay. And then 2024, it went up almost 600. And then just for the 2 months we're in 2025, 455 calls of service. If you go to the next slide. All right, so I do want to introduce Deputy Joe Douglas for the folks that don't know him. He is your Birch Bay deputy. So if you could give him a round of applause. Thanks, Joe. Would you like to say anything? No, you don't have to.
I just want to say I have really enjoyed being out here. This is start of my second year. So I bring 17 years of law enforcement experience with me. Last year was my first year out here. Really great connecting with everybody, talking with everybody, and I look forward to the next few years ahead.
So just want to highlight, I'm not going to read all those, few things that Joe has done out here in the last year as far as his community engagement. He did the drug take back twice. He attended many meetings with the chamber. When I was talking to him, he's like, sir, but I missed 2. I was like, I think you're doing pretty good. So those are some things that he's done over the last year. If you go to the next slide, and it continues. So he worked with different neighborhoods, doing the neighborhood watch program. He did active shooter training as well, and then also he helped to do some mitigation and problem solving in terms of some parking issues. If you go to the next slide. And then also crime prevention through education. He did an interview with the Northern Light, met with some HOAs. I know earlier they were talking about asking for names of HOAs, and then also more meetings with different neighborhood groups. So for me, actually being out in the community is what we do. And that's what I talk to all deputies. So to me, we're all part of the community and we should be out in the community. So just want to take my hat off to Joel. Next slide. All right. So, we're talking about how much does it cost? So these are fresh numbers from the sheriff's office today. This is just personnel. This includes salaries and benefits. What it does not include is overtime. This depiction is just 1 lieutenant, 1 sergeant, a records and ID technician, 5 deputies. And again, no overtime is included in this. And you're looking at 1.2 million just in flat cost. It does not include any type of startup cost or any cost that needs to be sustained. So if you go to the next slide. I did get some questions that was sent to me, so I want to answer those. What is the current level of service the Sheriff's Office provides to Birch Bay, and how would that change if we incorporate it and contract it with your department? That would simply depend on the contract. I've read many contracts in the last couple of weeks in terms of different sheriff's offices, different communities. But I will tell you that the 11 that Jonathan talked about is not far off. That's about the same number I came up with. So the national average per 1,000 police officers is actually 2.5 to 3.5 nationally. Here on the West Coast, we're way down from the East Coast. So on the West Coast, we're at about 1.6. Here in Whatcom County and Washington State, we're at about 1.1. So, for example, if you wanted to go the 1.6 route, if you did incorporate, you're going to need about 16 officers. If you go to 1.1, 1.0 route, which we have at the sheriff's office, then you would need about 10 deputies. Next slide. Will the sheriff's office assign dedicated deputies to Birch Bay, or would deputies still cover multiple areas as they do now? So if you did incorporate and you did contract with us, they will be assigned to Birch Bay. On the 2 slides ago with that lieutenant would actually be the chief of Birch Bay, and then that sergeant would be the sergeant. So those deputies will be assigned to Birch Bay, officially the Birch Bay Police Department, if that was to happen. Next slide. How does the sheriff's office approach community policing? Will there be opportunities for Birch Bay to tailor that approach to our community needs? Well, certainly, I hope you believe that being out in the community is important if you see all the work that Joel's doing. But certainly, if you did incorporate that city manager or city council would definitely have influence in the services that we provide to that particular community. Next slide. Will the sheriff's office recommend establishing a satellite officers or substation in Birch Bay to improve community access and visibility? Absolutely. I think that would be a necessity. If you look at, for example, Stanwood, they have the Stanwood Police Station. It's not a big place, but it's a place for the officers to certainly do their work. It's a place for the community to come to talk to the officers. But also, if you have a building, potentially part of that contract for those deputies to use that building, a lot of contracts actually have a credit, part of the contract for using that building. So I know in the current Stanwood contract, I believe it's about $48,000 a year off the total price, the total cost of the contract for the use of the building. Next slide. Does the sheriff have a suggestion by population or square mileage of suggested recommended staffing for a potential city our size? We did talk about that. What problems does he anticipate? And will we eventually establishing our law enforcement? Would he be pleased or challenged to work on a contract basis? I think it's incredibly tough to start your own police department from scratch. I mean, of course, a lot of places have. And here in Whatcom County, the last city we incorporated in Whatcom County was Everson. I believe that was in 120 years ago or so, right? So it is possible, but I think the challenge would be just really for the residents, because it would be something new. So I think if that was to happen, and just so you know, I'm not advocating either way for incorporation or not. I'm just giving what I believe the facts are. But I think it would just take some time because it would be new. And of course, with the folks here, I think it would be a lot of input. So for us, the challenge is really just getting the right contract done for the community. And as far as that last question, it's about the will of the people. So if you know, if Birch Bay did incorporate and you were certainly interested, the sheriff's office would certainly be at that table. Next slide. That's it. All right. Any questions?